of the November financial plan. So thank you, Hannah, for being here. And I'll kick it over to you. And we just need to
Get
unmute
you
Hannah.
unmuted. There we go. I'm sorry.
Yeah, do you also mind unmuting my colleague Cameron? He's going to be presenting with me.
Cameron, you should also have a prompt to unmute.
I do. Thank you very much.
You. There you
Perfect.
go.
Okay, so go ahead, Hannah and Cameron, and thanks for coming tonight.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for having us.
Absolutely.
Are
Appreciate
you
you
all
having
able
us.
to see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'm Hannah. I'll talk a little bit more about who I am in a second, but just to give you a little bit of the rundown for tonight, we're just going to spend a little bit of time going over some of, first of all, who we are as an organization. Then we'll talk a little bit about some of our recent reports that kind of go in line with some of the district needs statements that you had. Then Cameron's going to talk about the November plan, and we'll end by just hearing about how we can better assist your work as community boards. One of the things that we're really hoping to do this year is to pilot like some office hours and some resources to help community boards in presenting their district needs statements or putting together their preliminary budget response. And so we'd love to hear from you on how we can best do that. So we'll save some time at the end for conversation on that. Just a little bit about myself. I have been at IBO for around a year and a half. Before coming to IBO, I was a middle school teacher in the city. And so right now I do a lot of work with the education team, and then I do a lot of our youth outreach as well. And I'll pass it off to Cameron to introduce himself.
Thank you. Sorry, right now my video is okay. That's great timing. Okay, it's working now. My name is Cameron Chapman. I am a budget and policy analyst on the budget review team here at IBO. We cover a lot of citywide spending and initiatives, kind of fairly eclectic portfolio over a lot of topics. I generally focus on kind of things pertaining to citywide staffing as well as like energy efficiency, energy initiatives that go on throughout the city, generally kind of like the city's clean energy transition, as well as other various aspects of the government. So I hope we can, provide some useful insight, answer some questions, and thanks again for having us.
Cool. So just a little bit about IBO. Not sure if any of you have like looked through our website or come into contact with any of our resources. But just a little bit of our background. We are a nonpartisan city agency. So if you look at the city org chart, you'll notice that most of the agencies are under mayoral control, and we're all the way out on the right because we are independent. We were created in 1989 as the result of a city charter revision. And our main role was to provide an independent check on the executive budget. And so our role is really just to do independent work regarding the city budget. And I'll talk through some of the work that we do. So the bulk of our work throughout the year is to provide charter mandated reports that fall in line with OMB's reports and are really a response to OMB's numbers. Oftentimes we come up with different numbers than them, but that is kind of the meat of what we do throughout the year. Other than that, we provide year-round reports by subject area on relevant budgetary and policy issues. And so just as an example, yesterday, my colleague Caitlin put out a report looking at potential changes to foundation aid, which is the state formula through which New York State sends funds to school districts all around the city. There are four proposed changes that would really affect New York City's DOE budget. And so she was able to just price out what those proposed changes would look like. So just a really timely thing that we were able to put out and hopefully will help with state negotiations.
And I also will just add, just generally, like from a very high level perspective, foundation aid is essentially kind of like the per pupil cost or per student cost multiplied by the number of students within the city.
Yep. Next, we give testimony at City Council hearing. And then lastly, my favorite, we do presentations and offer general resources like these. And so, yeah, if any of you are interested in a budget presentation or if you have high schoolers that are, we love to chat about that too. So just to review the city budget timeline and also just point out when our reports come out. This is the timeline of the normal fiscal year, so it's going to look a little different than what this year will look like. But our reports, again, fall right after OMB's reports, and we're really doing our own independent analyses of city revenues and expenditures, not only in the current fiscal year, but also in the out years. And so, yep, that's just kind of where our reports fall. Some other key points to note along this timeline is that our budget, while it comes out July 1st, it really does fall in line with the federal budget and then in particular the state budget that comes out before April 1st. And that's because we receive a large amount of our own funding from state sources, and state sources really depend also heavily on the federal budget. And so our budget really works in tandem with the different budgets that are put out at the different levels of government. So yeah, just a little primer on the timeline. Um, New York City's budget falls into two categories. The expense budget is the budget that we're mainly going to be talking about today. It's also known as the operating budget or the program budget. And this is a one-year budget that covers day-to-day expenses such as salaries, supplies, and services. But we also have analysts on Cameron's team that work on the capital budget. And the capital budget is usually a longer 10-year term plan for projects that cost at least $50,000 and have a minimum useful life of 5 years. So if you guys have questions on the capital budget or the school construction authority budget, we have analysts that work on that portfolio as well.
And one thing I also just wanted to add really quickly, Hannah, is that if it's unclear, like there's a financial plan for the expense side and the capital side. So the expense budget covers the current year, which in this case would be fiscal year 26. But the financial plan, the expense like side financial plan will cover 5 years, whereas the capital plans can range anywhere from like 4 years to 10 years, depending on which one you're looking at. It's a bit confusing, but just want to clarify that. So now we can just talk about, where the city gets its money from, like where does our revenue come in? And then after we talk about this, we'll get into how the city allocates those funds that we get from these various revenues. So the largest bucket will be taxes. You can see like property tax, personal income tax, the business income tax, and the general sales tax. That is our largest source of funding. But then we also get, non-negligible share from the federal and state government, kind of like Hannah said before. The way the federal government sets their budget, as well as how the state decides to allocate funding, has pretty serious implications on how the city can fund its own budget. I'm sure many recall last year, there was a delay in the state budget. I believe it was last year that there was a delay in the state budget release. The city's budget still came out. This would have been the executive budget, but there were a lot of unknowns because we were still waiting on kind of like the state budget. So it was kind of like viewed sort of like as a shell budget. Not that it was like fake, but it's just that, certain changes at the state level could substantially change some of the allocations we see in our budget. So it's always important to kind of think about that cog when like evaluating the whole machine on the revenue side. And then as to where it's going, we decided to kind of break it out by sort of like, this is a group them into categories basically without getting too elaborate, and you can kind of see how the city is allocating its funding for fiscal year 26 with, the plurality of it going towards education, but, a lot in health and social services, pensions and fringe claims, public safety. Just for some examples, like education is 99% the Department of Education, but then also CUNY. Health and social services include, the Human Resource Administration, Department of Homeless Services, Administration for Children's Services, pension fringe claims and such. That is there's a lot of stuff there, but we'll skip that. We'll go to public safety, FDNY, NYPD, things like that, housing and infrastructure, housing preservation and development, as well as I might be fully HPD, but there's a couple other ones, probably small business services, maybe. And if there's any other ones you guys are curious about, or like you would like to know, like the specific agencies within a particular like category that we have here, feel free to ask at any point. But that's just kind of to give you guys an idea of, well, where is the city's money coming from? Like where like these revenues that the city has, like what comprises them, and then in the current year, how are those funds being allocated, and kind of like what are the city's like main areas of funding? What are the things that require the most funding to administer? And Hannah mentioned a bit earlier in the presentation that we were kind of going to mention some of the things that may or may not be kind of like relevant to some of the needs that you guys listed in your new needs statement. This is there's a project that I worked on that released last year on adult protective services. Some of you may be familiar, but essentially this is a program that's administered. Well, technically it's administered by the state, but it is run locally, like at the city level, by the Human Resource Administration. And this is to these are services that are provided for people over the age of 18, yeah, who cannot safely take care of themselves. And this report was the kind of like the genesis of this report was what you could see in this chart here is like kind of like a declining number of adult protective services referrals being accepted by HRA over time. And you could see in the last couple of years, there were they were hitting lows at referral acceptance rate that were hadn't been seen in a very long time. And this is while the referral volume was up dramatically. So especially after the pandemic, you can see after the onset of the pandemic, you can see that there's like a depression of those referrals, and then they spike quickly, whereas the acceptance rate is declining. And we were kind of trying to figure out, okay, well, what is it? What is the reason for this trend? And a key thing that we identified was staffing issues. And mainly it was because like they had lost a lot of staff during kind of like the thralls of the pandemic. And then as I said before, referrals were depressed, but as those referrals kind of began to rebound and the staffing couldn't necessarily keep up, HRAs at that point in time began hiring very rapidly. And you can see the workforce had increased quite a bit, but the problem that they were having was not only was this a shift in the composition of their workforce, whereas now the experience of the workers that administered the APS program had dropped dramatically. And even among those workers and among all workers, separations increased drastically. And that's what this chart is showing you in regards to caseworker. Caseworkers are the title that are tasked with determining eligibility of these referrals. And here we're kind of visualizing the rates of retirement and resignation over the period that we examined. And you can see in those years where the referral acceptance rate began to shrink, as you saw in the previous chart, that's where you can see some very kind of like abnormal behavior in regards to these separation rates, where you can see first in 2022, this is towards the tail end of a lot of the pandemic era restrictions. There was a huge spike in the number of retirements at HRA, which drastically lowered the experience among their active workers. And then shortly after is when they began to experience an influx of referrals. And so they had a lot of referrals to deal with, and they lost a lot of their most experienced people, which resulted in them having to hire up a lot. And among those new hires, the turnover was incredibly rapid. And you can see that's where 2023 onward on the resignation rate line, you can see how drastically resignations increased. And that was kind of like the tail of the tape that they are struggling very mightily at retaining people. And that's at a time where referral volume was increasing dramatically. We weren't drawing any causal links to this report, but we were kind of pointing out, hey, like these are the trends that are going on within like the workers, within the staff composition of adult protective services at HRA. And these are happening in tandem with a dramatic increase in the volume of referrals. And we're seeing the lowest rates of referrals be accepted over the last 9 years.
I'm really quickly just going to go over the next two reports. This is a report that my colleague Emma put out recently looking at early child care capacity by district. And the goal of her report was really just to look at where early child care demand was the highest. And so as you can see here in District 5, for example, the percent of seats that were filled in early child care providers throughout that district was around 64%, but there were also districts where the numbers were a lot higher and they were pushing 95, 96%. And this was, again, just to visualize demand by district. And she's actually updating these numbers, hoping that they will kind of influence the further outreach and seat reallocations that this administration might think about when expanding 3K and pre-K programs. So if you have any questions on early childcare, be happy to direct you to her as well. Lastly, just some of our work on affordable housing that might be in line with your district need statements. we've done a lot of recent reporting on the outcomes of the two different mechanisms that the city uses to stimulate affordable housing. Those being either direct city subsidies, where the city is actually giving out low interest loans or grants to developers. And so that's kind of the direct financing mechanism. There's also inclusionary housing, and this was a big part of City of Yes, where the city actually allows developers to build more than they can through the zoning code, as long as they set aside a portion of those new developments for affordable housing. And so this graph that my colleague Sarah published is just showing kind of the expansion of inclusionary housing. And City of Yes really expanded this mechanism to a lot of different areas around the city, which is all these areas in blue. And so City of Yes was really a kind of mayoral choice to use zoning and inclusionary housing instead of direct city subsidies in order to stimulate affordable housing. So I'm not going to get into too much detail, but again, if you have any questions on affordable housing, please reach out and we'd be happy to put you in touch with our housing analyst.
And one other thing I was just going to add there is that there's also a testimony from October by Sarah Parker that is on our website where she kind of like outlines all of the types of housing subsidies that exist in the city if that's something that might be interesting to you.
November.
Yeah, so now we're just going to talk about the November plan and like what we found in our analysis of the city's budget in this past November. We're still kind of on the lookout for what could or could not be changed at the federal level and how that might impact some of these departments that receive a lot of funds from the federal government, which include education, HPD, and social services. Yeah, so then we just have the Adams administration budgets, approximately 20 million state dollars for FY26. However, change at the state level can constrict the state's budget, and that can then have a cascading effect on what is available to the city. So it's not just direct funds to the city from the federal government, but also direct funds from the federal government to the state government that then come down to the city level. That's something else we have to look out for. And then you can see just in FY26, about 16% of the budget is comprised of state grants and contracts, and 7% is from federal grants and contracts. Think about supplemental nutrition assistance program, Medicaid contributions, and other things.
Whoops.
So yeah, the primary takeaways that we highlighted in this past rendition of our analysis of the mayor's financial plan is that currently, as of November, we forecasted a deficit in the budget, and the city is required by law to balance the budget of the current year. So that is something that is important to be on the lookout for, where we estimate a $380 million operating gap deficit. And then we project those gaps to be even larger in the out years. We project them even larger than the mayor's office projects them to be. And if you're interested in some of the drivers for that, beyond what we've discussed very briefly here, our analysis is also on our website where you can kind of see in detail what we anticipate will be the things that kind of like are driving these gaps that do need to be closed. But like I said, some of them here include we have found that or anticipate social services will require additional funding. There also is going to be more funding for uniformed personnel costs, if very simply overtime for police officers, firefighters, people who work at FDNY, as well as the Department of Corrections and Department of Sanitation. And then we also are forecasting that there might be some under budgeting that's contributing to some of the differences in the gaps in the out years, particularly for the Department of Education, which in accordance with the new class size mandate, we anticipate that we will need to hire more staffing that is presently budgeted to comply with that mandate.
Thanks. Yeah, really, really great news.
Yes.
Yeah, we will conclude with that for our November plan. But yeah, we just left a couple of minutes too for discussion, and then also, again, just hoping to hear from you on what would be most helpful to you. We are going to be piloting a community board office hours too for people that are interested in March, and so we'll follow up with those details. But yeah, we just left a couple minutes up for discussion, or if you have any questions. Yeah.
So I'd just kick it off. I welcome your thoughts on how community boards can make the district needs statement more effective and the source of data to kind of highlight what those issues are that meet community demands. So, for example, you mentioned um, early childhood seats, and that's something that's come up a number of times on um, in the budget process. People have complained about insufficient numbers of early childhood seats in this district, but it's been hard to pinpoint that data. So,
Mhm.
when you have it by district, is it by count that you listed? Was that council district or
This
community
is by
district?
school district, yeah.
By school districts,
Yeah,
where
I can send you
so
that.
where District 2, I guess,
Yes,
that
I
covers a
believe so.
broader
So I can
area.
send you that report if you're interested. And then Emma is also updating it for more current numbers because that was based on 23, 24 data. But she's working on that analysis now as well.
Okay. The other issue that's come up a lot are high school seats and students not getting placed in the high schools in this district.
Mhm.
Is there a way of kind of gathering data on the number of students who are applying for spots in this district and where they end up? Because I
We did
think,
have a paper that I think came out 3 years ago that was exactly like this, where it was talking about the high school admissions process pipeline and kind of where people ended up within that. And so I know we do have the data on that. It just hasn't been probably, we haven't done a report on it in a while, but I can definitely try to find out the data source and send it to you. The only thing is we do get some of our education data specifically through a memo of understanding, so it's not always public, but I can ask around and see if there would be any data sources on open data or anything that
And
could.
no, and the other thing I wanted to add a little bit more broadly to that is that um we did do there, I think it was last year that we had there was analysis released of the class size mandate and like how that is anticipated to have like impact all levels of education from like a 3K, pre-K, kindergarten, well, mainly elementary school through high school, and like how these class size mandates, like essentially like the teachers that will be needed to kind of like fulfill these class size mandates, as well as kind of like what schools are in compliance or like can feasibly be in compliance. And it goes into like a lot of detail that does intersect quite a bit with some of the questions that you're asking as pertains to um like class admissions and some of the kind of like constraints that go into these various aspects of class size in the city. So I would definitely recommend checking that out. I hope it could be helpful to you in this regard. It might be a little bit more general than what you're requesting currently, but I think it still is useful.
okay, great. Yeah, because we've talked about in terms of class size, you have had the combination of shrinking um, school age population kind of in general and more of a post-COVID issue combined with the new class size mandate. So it would be interesting to try to match them up because the number of available class seats in this district has become an issue. And so when we comment on it, it would be great to actually have the facts that support whatever statement we're making about, the need for additional whatever age class, whether it's high school or early childhood.
Gotcha. Do you
Absolutely.
know?
And yeah, and thinking about teachers is an important part of that. Just thinking about the role that teachers play in that. And basically like the city has some initiatives in place to kind of like increase teacher kind of like acquisition hiring and stuff like that, because there are some specific subject areas, especially like at the high school level, where there is a need for teachers that some of these city programs aim to kind of alleviate.
Yeah, especially when IBO is hiring middle school teachers, taking them away from the school system.
I worked in a charter school, so that was a whole nother issue.
And then the one other question I wanted to ask, because you brought up affordable housing. So obviously that's one of the top priorities of every community board and has been for this one. But the question has always been, as a community board, and the response we get from the city is they want you to be more specific as opposed to there's just not enough housing and the housing that there is not affordable.
Mhm.
So what are the things that can be pointed to one, show data on the number of units lost versus, affordable units lost versus new units in the district. And then what's the request for building more units? Is it a request to HPD? Like who's it a request to for?
So if you're talking about direct city subsidies, those are usually managed by HPD or Housing Development Corporation, so HDC. But those direct city subsidies are usually pretty limited, and that's why the city relies so much on these zoning incentives. Um, I can reach out to our housing analyst, Sarah, and she might be able to like better put you in touch with or like get data to answer your question. But just to be specific, you're just trying to get data on like how many units have been added and lost in like the last 10 years, let's say, for your district.
Well, I think the question is how can we be more effective
Mhm.
as a community board in advocating for the need for more affordable housing in this district? And the to the extent that we can add additional data
Mm,
to support that or make a specific request for what we want done in this district could be helpful.
gotcha. Okay. She also probably would know more about like their capital plan, and a lot of times for SCA, for example, like they respond to community boards and say like you need to read our capital plan, and it's like 150 pages. So that's kind of ridiculous that they're expecting that. So she might be somebody that is, like more in the weeds with the document that could talk to you guys if you're trying to tailor like a response to a certain agency.
Yeah, and there also might be just some kind of like council district, like neighborhood population area and or parcel level data that one could uh aggregate um that cover um basically that cover like the domain that like this community board sort of like oversees. Where you could at least get an idea of kind of like the assessed value of like the various parcels throughout the community board or not the, sorry throughout the district. And that could give you a good idea of kind of like just generally speaking like what's like the fair market value like of this land, like given you know certain types of developments that are on it, like what's being built on it, like just little things like that where you could at least like have that information. That is something that I'm sure with a data request we could compile.
Well, that would be very helpful because normally we get these responses back either there's no funding available or you haven't been specific enough. So we're within, for example, if a committee is undertaking a particular initiative, then they could reach out to you all and say, this is what we need background information about with some data, because that also sometimes informs what our priorities are as we go forward with our district needs, each October. And so that would be extremely helpful because it doesn't, if you don't have the data, it's very hard to support your argument, even though you know that a need does exist. So that's terrific.
Yeah, I know that I saw in your meeting agenda that you're all meeting to talk about the district needs and the prelim budget. So maybe if it's okay with you all, I can just stay and take some notes, and that
We'd
way,
love to have you
yeah, I
stay.
could
Thank you.
disseminate the information to the relevant people on our team too.
Good.
Okay, sounds great. Gail, do you have any other questions?
I don't. Anybody who's joined us? Any other questions? I don't see any hands raised. Okay. Then, as Hannah just pointed out, we are going to have a discussion on the citywide statement of needs. And the CSUN or SUN came out for fiscal year 27, 28. And it's interesting because, back in October, we did our district needs statement, and we looked at both the expense side, the programmatic and operating side, as well as the capital side. What's interesting about the citywide statement is that it does not address per se, the expense budget. It really is dealing with the capital issues. And as Hannah pointed out, these are construction projects that would cost at least $50,000. And it can be an IT system. It doesn't have to be a building. But you really have to have something that's going to have a life expectancy of about 5 years. What's fascinating is that the changes this year came out of the November election when we had the ballots, and ballot measure 5 had the capital planning question, and it expanded the city's responsibility. And what the city has to do is start to look at facility maintenance and keep the assets that the city is responsible for in good repair. And that has not been something before. It's not that they're not trying to keep facilities properly maintained, but with the district needs statement, it was much more, here's a project per se. Now what they want to do is look further in a more global sense to see what's already in place, what has to be maintained. Is the shelf life, so to speak, deteriorating? So this is something that I think is really going to be very positive. They looked at the district needs statements that came in from all 59 community boards across the 5 boroughs. And what was fascinating is you'll recall that our pressing needs were affordable housing. Then we looked at perception of crime and safety and livability and parks. Those are the 3 pressing needs that came out as the top 3 for the entire city. And that doesn't mean that every community board had those 3, but many community boards had at least one. And with affordable housing, 31 of 59 of the community boards citywide said that affordable housing was one of their top 3 pressing needs. When it comes to crime, public safety, perception of crime, 15 out of 59 community boards noted that this was something that was really very important to them. And then parks and open space, we're talking about 14 out of 59 community boards looked at those 3 issues as being most relevant. And as you'll recall, there were all the other policy areas that we also dealt with: health and human services, transportation, et cetera. And they're all addressed in the report. And I would think that maybe we might have Ian send, I think the district needs the citywide statement is so well written, and it gives you a sense of the changes that it would be really good for all of our fellow board members to be able to take a look at it. But I think that down the road, we're going to see that there'll be some changes from just saying, well, now we've got 2 parks in District 5 and they have to be maintained. It's not that they're not going to continue to fund individual local requests, but it's the city is going to kind of look much more broadly at what input is coming in locally, and then trying to see whether or not that particular information can be woven into the overall statement of needs so that they'll be a little bit more proactive as compared to just reacting to what they're receiving from all the community boards. That's kind of a summation of what's in the report. Did you want to add anything, Felice?
Sure. Ian, I was wondering if you could put a link to the citywide statement of needs in the chat.
Everyone should see it there now. I just sent it.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you. And then the other thing, maybe we could put it up and just kind of show people what it is, because one of the things that is in there is some detailed information about what is in the district. So, if you can scroll through, it'll go through. So, like for right. So here it has, how people have ranked it by district with and orange is Manhattan, highlighting it, and then when it goes through the different communities. So if like you go to parks, and I pick parks just because I co-chair the parks committee. Um, you can, it'll give you specific information about um, what the city's response was to kind of different parks, and you can download the data set. And there's just a lot of detailed information that you
It's
can
true.
see about the city and where parks are. Um, there are maps when you go through it. So you can highlight Community Board 8, and different issues. And it gives the response. I think a little bit of a dated response that the city had to those issues. So when we said, reconstruct Samuel Seabury Park, it'll have the response. We support it, but there's not enough money to do it now, and those sorts of things. So there's some useful information. So I encourage folks to um, scroll through and gather some of the data. Anyone have any issues or comments? Okay, so one of the roles of the community board is to comment on the mayor's preliminary budget, the mayor's executive budget that is generally released in January. But because we have a new administration, and they need time to kind of figure things out, assess the state of the budget, come up with their plan. I believe it's not supposed to be released until February 17th, I
Correct.
believe. So next Tuesday. And we have until the end of the month to submit our comments on that preliminary budget. So one of the things we're asking for is approval because of the timing of when the full board is meeting. We would need approval to draft a response based on what was submitted in the district needs statement, and we can and to have an evaluation. Gail, do you want to add anything to that?
All we're going to do is just ask you to allow Felice and myself to write the response, just given the fact that we want to really meet the deadline. And if anybody has any other suggestions as far as a way to make that happen, we would appreciate it. But if everyone agrees that we can write the response on behalf of the committee, then we'll take it to the full board next Wednesday night to ask the board to approve having the two of us go ahead and do the response. Because we don't want to fail to meet the deadline, even if we're getting the information late.
Go ahead, Ashley.
Hi, my name's Ashley. If you write the response based off of the district needs, when the mayor releases the preliminary budget, will you write a response to that eventually?
It will be the response to what gets released on next Tuesday. So like one of the things we call for is which other groups have called for, is spending 1% of the city's budget on parks. Given the budget issues that the city is facing, I would be surprised if he actually allocates 1% of the budget to parks. So that would be one of the things that we would comment on, calling for, spending more money on the expense needs for parks.
Right. Or like their summer youth programs. Now, what will that funding be? Because we always advocate for that to ensure that young people have summer employment. Will it be adequate or not? We don't know, but if it's not, we still are able to look at anything where we have cuts in areas that we view as priorities And all we can do is write back. And this is where with the IBO, it can be very helpful also when we look at what the preliminary budget has to say. And if there's a way to make our arguments even stronger with additional data, we're more than happy to reach out to Hannah and Cameron to see if that's a possibility that can help us with our response.
Hannah, do you want to add something? I see your hands
Yeah,
up.
I was just going to ask how you all go about your process of reviewing the preliminary budget and then issuing the response, because I know it's a massive document. And then I know every community board does it differently. And so in thinking about like better setting up the office hours, is there a process that you go through to review the prelim budget before constructing your response? Like, what does that look like even for you?
Well, anything that you can do that provides guidance or insight would be
Mm,
much appreciated because it is massive and we are not budget analysts. I personally tend to just look at the summary and then
mhm,
look to what the Citizens Budget Commission has to say about the budget or other, or even IBO, like other independent groups to the extent that there's information that we can pull on, and then look, generally at the capital budget and see whether investments are going, up or down in certain key categories.
mhm.
And
But
we're
I,
in a little,
yeah, I guess like beyond, are you, when you issue your response, is it like looking at an agency budget as a whole? Or are you usually tracking like particular programs, or is it just a little more general when you issue your response?
both.
Okay.
A general response, but also specificity. And normally, this meeting would have been a meeting to discuss the preliminary budget.
Mhm.
And so you'd have community co-chairs who are dealing with different initiatives, and they are able to then come back and say, well, no, this is very disturbing with
Mhm.
this cut because we just found out that the need has increased to X amount or whatever the case might be.
Mhm.
So this time, any help that we can get, and as much as Felice and I will have to just take a look, but I agree with her. We see what the summary is, and we also you look to see if anything is really out of line.
Yeah.
If there are cuts that are minimal, you don't like them, but if there's a multi-billion-dollar deficit, you have
Mhm.
to deal with that. But if there's something that really is a massive cut
Yeah.
and it just doesn't look like equity, then that's something that we're able to definitely respond to.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask a couple of questions off of a few things that came to mind listening to this discussion. How do you guys frequently or infrequently review either the mayor's detailed initiative funding report or the differ, and as well as the MMR, the mayor's or mayoral management report? Are those documents that you guys interface with much?
I do look at the MMR, um, but I don't know. That doesn't really give kind of the granular district specific data. Um, it'll, and I tend to look at it more in terms of like capital projects completed, percentage started, things like
Mhm.
that.
Yeah, I guess I was
Mhm.
thinking of it more in the sense of to kind of tie into like some stuff that I've covered in the past. Like, let's just like hypothetically speaking, let's just say like there's a kind of like a pressing or like a frequent issue that comes about in regards to public assistance in a particular district. And then if you were like look at the mayor's management report and you could see, oh well, it turns out like the timeliness like for delivering these benefits to people who are qualified for them has been kind of like decreasing like drastically like year on year. Like that's sort of the kind of thing where just generally, I think if you can identify sort of like things that are sort of ailing the city writ large and tie them back to like specific things that you're identifying in your district, beyond like, the big ones like affordable housing and stuff, that could be something that's useful. And then just
Mhm.
lastly, in regards to the detailed initiative funding report, that will actually show you the changes per agency from plan to plan. So, for example, when the prelim budget comes out next week, the differ or detailed initiative funding report will show all of the changes that have been made from Mayor Adams's final budget, and you can kind of see, oh, like funding was added here, or funding was taken from here and moved here. That's another thing to keep in mind. Like sometimes when you see a funding dip, it's just that that funding was moved to a maybe sometimes even the same agency, just like a different unit of appropriation. So it's not as though they like lost funding. It's just obviously they just moved the funding. But like those are the kind of things where you can see like at least this budget, because it's Mamdani's very first budget, it might be a bit abnormal. So like that it might not necessarily be like that everything in this budget is kind of like indicative of things to come in terms of like the way that they budget. But it will be a good idea to know like, okay, like where are funds being taken down from, where are they being added? Does this give some sort of inkling as to like where the priorities are going, or where the priorities are? Are these priorities matching kind of like what we've been hearing? Or maybe nothing has been done yet. But that's just something I think it would be important to kind of look out for, so you can kind of just like, if you really want to like, so you can really like think about and like see the changes that are being made, maybe like know why, and potentially that could be helpful.
Definitely. Thank you.
So let me ask you a question. One of the things that often comes up and as an issue are enforcement of um, street vendors, stuff like that, and there have been kind of changes as to what agency is responsible for that kind of enforcement. And so I guess to your point, so looking at DWCP, the Department of Worker and Consumer Protection, which Mamdani has plans to strengthen and has a new commissioner that is going to be very aggressive. So that's an area where I guess how would we look at that is that more of a policy change or is that a funding change? I guess I question how to look at something like that.
Um, I'm trying to how to look at, I guess, like how any changes that could be like to street vendor like regulation could potentially like
Yeah,
manifest, I guess, in the budget.
I mean we could just unmute Michelle because a lot of the issues have come up about um, some of the illegal street vending and cleanliness of those issues and things like that. Go ahead, Michelle.
Yeah, that really has to do with either laws that the city council passed, so that they have to be laws that are on the books. And then there's a series of internal rules. You know how each agency has certain rules that they create within the agency, and then they make a decision as to whether or not to enforce those. And in all cases of enforcement, they have to assign enough people in order to make the enforcement possible. Now, along with the laws that are passed and the rules that were made, from what I have been able to discern, I'm a co-chair of the vendor committee for like 20 years, and it's been an issue of mine even before that. I never see any enforcement appropriations go along with the new laws or regulations. So, so they may have some new rules and regulations, but they haven't increased the number of enforcing agents. Like they'll have 5 for all 5 boroughs or 10 for all 5 boroughs. And then they'll partner up with the PEP officers in the park, because now street vendors who are not permitted in the parks are now infiltrating the parks. However, they try to partner, but they don't have enough manpower to enforce what the current rules and regulations and laws are. And each year in the budget, I always try to ask for more money for this enforcement. Not only doesn't it seem to be a priority, but in fact, there's a very substantial lobby that's not necessarily disregarded by the administration, that doesn't want enforcement of street vending at all. They would like to see it as entrepreneurship, as a right to make a living off the streets, and a whole series of rationale that someone may have. Well, some of us have the same series of rationale as to why that's not practical, not wise, not beneficial, and leaves it in an uncontrollable, influencing sanitation, environmental. Um, like there's no, like for example, for truck vendors and food vendors, cooking vendors, there's a rule to be brought that cart has to be brought back to its commissary every 24 hours to be cleaned, to be supplied, to get potable water, etc., etc. Yet there is no mandatory um, keeping of attendance. So and these commissaries are not owned by the city, they're privately owned. So if they don't turn out to be profitable, they'll go out of business, leaving that vendor to try to find another commissary 2 more miles away, 10 more miles away. So appropriation and funding for the enforcement side of street vending has been an ongoing problem for 20 years. It has never been adequate.
When you're
Never.
talking about street vending, are you talking about licensed street vendors or
Well,
unlicensed?
I would hope there's a whole other category of
Mhm.
unlicensed.
Yeah.
So that's a whole other problematic situation.
Mhm.
There are now many, many, many unlicensed. And you
Mm.
would think that the enforcement of that
Mhm.
would be easy because your enforcing agent wouldn't even have to know vendor law to do that. They would
Yeah.
just have to know, let me see your license. Do you have it? Do you don't? The
Mhm.
Midtown South and the Chinatown enforcing agents are very good about that
Mhm.
because um, they have a whole black market going on down there,
Mhm.
which exists up here too, but nowhere to that extent. And so, nor is it that easy to spot. But yes, illegal, no question that's an issue. And
Mhm.
police can get involved in that as well.
Yeah, that was good. What I was going to say. To my understanding, the enforcing agencies for that would be DSNY and NYPD. I don't know if the health
Well,
department or the
yeah,
consumer
well,
protection department have their own mechanisms for enforcement.
who?
I'm not really sure if the Department of Consumer and Worker Protections would be
Well,
enforcing that
not
or.
in terms of fraud or anything like that. No.
Mhm.
Now, the Department of Sanitation is a very recent enforcer. They were
Yep.
not the enforcer until a couple of years ago.
Mhm.
And frankly, they're the wrong enforcer. Or at least they should be partnering
Yep.
with consumer affairs, worker protection, all of
Mhm.
those. Because what happens with sanitation is they're only looking at sanitation. They
Mhm.
are not necessarily conversant with vendor law. Vendor law is very extensive. And not only is it city, it's also state. Um, and they're not aware of the law. They're not
Mhm.
schooled in the law. They don't know
Mhm.
the law. So if they go over to a food cart and they see garbage on the floor, well, they know that's an infraction.
Mhm.
More times than not, what they would do with that is say, they give them a warning and say, we're coming back, make sure you don't do that anymore.
Mhm.
Well, not exact. That enforcement doesn't have any teeth. They don't necessarily know to ask for the commissary attendance, to
Mhm.
ask about the 25-foot rule from a primary or secondary entrance to a building,
Mhm.
to ask about 20 or 25 feet to a business of like kind, to ask about an 8-foot table, to reinforce the fact that it's one fruit vendor per 8-foot table,
Mhm.
not allowed to have two. They don't know any of those. And I'm
And
sure they're not educated for that.
and
I
I
don't
think
know where that works into your budget in terms of enforcement, but those are our needs.
and it's something that's come up a number of times, and so
Every year.
right. And as we are looking to comment, I mean, this may not be the top priority of a new administration and getting kind of into the weeds on something like that, but it would be helpful just to understand, like, if it's something that we comment on every year,
Mhm.
how can we actually be more specific
Yeah.
in what our request is or
And
highlighting where the issues lie?
yeah, just to make this like most productive, when you're sending those requests, is it DCWP that you're sending those to?
I think that part of the issue is it's shifting whose
Yeah, the
responsibility it is.
sanitation. Yeah.
And so also becomes the question, is it to sanitation or
Mhm.
DCWP or
That changes every year.
somebody else. And so while this is getting kind of into the weeds
Mhm.
on an issue, it is kind of the global concept of trying to figure out how we can really provide a thoughtful response on what an issue is to get someone's attention to actually take corrective
It's,
action.
if I may, it's a major quality of life issue
Mhm.
for people in the community,
Mhm.
not necessarily on a philosophical level for the administration.
Mhm.
In other words, philosophically, it's quality of life because it affects everything.
Mhm.
And it's in front of people's buildings. And I take the complaints and I file them with the agencies who are now requiring 311 numbers. And all the people in the community email them to me with pictures, with locations, and I forward them and follow it with response. So, for
Mhm.
example, there's one lady, it's probably 2 years now. She has one hot hot dog vendor that's in one place 24/7, never leaves for cleaning. If you were to move the cart, you'd see the grease stain. Send somebody, an enforcing agent down there who asks, you don't have to show that you were at the commissary. You can simply say you were at the commissary.
Mhm.
You don't have the right. A lot of it has to do with legislation, although there are laws for that. We also got word through a back route that, in fact, this legislation, this administration ask that street vending laws not be enforced.
Mhm.
Very low priority. However, when you give a community a budget, the community is telling you what's their priority.
Mhm.
So there should be some weight about that. If an item comes up as a request every single year for the past 10 years, somewhere in the top numbers,
Mhm.
well, that's the community's priority.
And I don't know if this I mean, obviously, I don't know if this is something that necessarily you can track in the budget on how that is, but it was just a question on something that we're always a little challenged with how to be a
Mhm.
little bit more specific about or to respond to whether it's funded or not funded. And so while it is getting a little into the weeds,
Yeah.
it is something, is an issue. So if there's any, help or guidance and kind of how to look at something like that, that could be
Yeah,
helpful.
Cameron, maybe we can look and see if there's a specific budget code in either sanitation or DCWP that ties into that and get back to you guys. Because sometimes
Mhm.
there
Yeah,
are
that's
specific budget codes that describe the exact issue that you're talking about. Sometimes agencies do have them, sometimes they don't. But if we are able to find it, we'll get back to you with that
Okay,
Yeah, there
information.
thanks.
might be a code that has that sort of PS cost like allocated out for it specifically. I would be surprised if that were the case. Generally speaking, just from the sound of this, it doesn't really sound quite as much like a staffing issue, and it sounds more like an education issue. Like it's just the case that like a lot of cops are not necessarily privy to all of like the street vending
Right.
regulations,
And it's
therefore,
and it's
and
a
thus they can't.
policy priority. And Michelle wants to add something.
Yeah, I just wanted to say the police used to be involved,
Mhm.
whereas they would work with Department of Consumer Affairs. That was originally an enforcing agency, isn't any long. They were licensing agency
Mhm.
for a small part of the time they were an enforcing agency. Now they're not enforcing.
Mhm.
And now it's worker protection and sanitation can help, and police can help. But when
Mhm.
you're talking about appropriation, it's mainly funding for a staff to
Mhm.
back the internal rules, to enforce the internal
Yeah.
rules that are already on the books and the legislation. In other words, you can't keep having legislation out there and then there's nobody around to do anything about it.
Mhm.
And right, and this could be a policy issue in how, you know, and how the city is spending its money. But
I mean, I'll give an antithesis and then I'll pass it back to you, Felice. Take the people who are the meter tickets. You know, the
Mhm.
traffic agents.
Yeah,
traffic
traffic
agents,
enforcement
right?
agents.
You can be sure that if you are 5 minutes over on your meter, you're going to get a ticket. There are enough of them all over the city. It may vary with weather, it may vary with certain conditions, but the bottom line is you're going to get a ticket. You will never be able to park with impunity and
Mhm.
let your meter run out. You will get a ticket. I've proposed, why don't you educate them about vendor enforcement? They're on the street anyway and you're paying them anyway. They're well funded. There's a lot of them, and make them the enforcers, not, different. But you have to remember there's a tremendous lobby in opposition to this.
Mhm.
And I think that depending on the administration, that's who they look to. However, that doesn't stop us from having our priority and making it known.
Mhm.
So I think Felice's question is a good one. How do we best do that? I
Mhm.
think is the question.
So, thank you, Hannah and Cameron. Really appreciate your time and information tonight. Is there anyone that has any questions?
At least just one question.
Sure.
Do we have to have a vote or just hand raises by committee members in order to bring this to the full board on Wednesday with the understanding that we will be doing the response on behalf of the committee?
Ian, what are
So my understanding from our earlier conversations, I think tonight we need to do two votes. Number one is to sort of adopt or recommend the citywide statement of needs. And a second, I think, can just be a motion to take to the full board next Wednesday, requests that they will grant you, the budget co-chairs, permission to respond to the preliminary budget as you see fit. I think those are the two items to be voted on, but you can let me know if that is incorrect.
I guess my question is, what is there to vote on the citywide statement of needs? Because my sense was that it was more informational than something to take. Do we?
Valerie had mentioned perhaps voting, but I don't know that we came to a resolution on it. So I'll leave it to you, Felice, and to Gail how you want to handle that. If you are I think what's done is done. It's not something that necessarily community boards are asked to vote on, but it's a good thing to have on your radar. So I'll leave it to you if you wish to vote on an official response to that.
I would agree with Felice. I think it is much more of an informational item, and we've never voted on the citywide district needs statement before.
Excellent. And I think what you see in that as it relates to Community District 8 is largely coming from our district needs statement anyway, so you've
Right.
theoretically already voted on that content. So the only
Correct.
item you would need to vote
Mhm.
on then is your request to full board next Wednesday.
Okay. Can you poll the committee members here?
I
Which I
can.
think is
Board
Craig
members as
and
well, or we can
Michelle.
do by acclamation, or if anyone chooses to vote against.
Michelle?
We're gonna head
Yeah,
out, but thank you
I'm
so
not, I
much
don't,
for
Thank
having
you.
us.
Bye,
Thank you.
And
Hannah.
have a
Bye,
great night.
Cameron.
Yeah,
Thank you so
thank you,
much.
IBO
Gail.
Thank you very
folks.
much.
thank you. I'm not quite sure what you're voting on. You mean giving you and Gail the ability to,
Write a
Draft the response and
I
send
mean,
it back.
well,
Mhm.
isn't that why you're the head of the committee? I mean, do we need a vote? I don't ever remember voting on that.
And I'm not
I
sure
mean,
that
I'm
we,
happy to vote on it, but I don't see.
I don't know if we need a vote. Valerie had mentioned that I believe she wanted one, just so
So
that we were able to go to the board on next Wednesday night and say that the committee, has voted to have us, and this is what we
All
want
right,
to do.
that's what the committee does, and you're the co-chair.
I-
So
Right,
I
know.
should clarify the reason that we're sort of straying from the regular path here is because the change in administration means that there is a slight delay in the issuance of the preliminary budget. So the custom typically would be that the preliminary budget is issued by the beginning of February, and that tonight,
We had the
under
meeting.
other circumstances,
we would have
you
been
would be
talking about
voting
it.
on that response, and then the response goes to the full board. But
Yes.
because of the schedule change, this is now the full board would be giving the budget committee co-chairs permission to issue that response on their own, because there will not be another budget committee meeting before the tighter turnaround time to submit
Oh,
the
but was that a decision made that we're definitely not having another? Because when that comes in,
well,
why?
it'll be post, we'll miss the deadline. So because of
Oh, that
when
now I understand. Okay,
yeah,
okay, now I got it. All
Craig?
right, so I make a motion to fill in the
I'm
words.
going to go ahead and unmute Craig. Craig looks like he has something to say.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I guess my question is there a reason why we can't schedule another budget meeting after it gets issued? And just as we do with any other committee in which there is a deadline for the community board to weigh in before the next meeting occurs, where the committee vote then becomes the vote of the full board.
Let's see.
And that's
So,
not to say that I'm not
oh,
supportive of the process in which Gail and Felice are handling. I have the utmost trust in you to do it. I'm just wondering about, I feel like this vote doesn't make a lot of sense today, and it would make more sense if we actually were to have a discussion and when the time is appropriate, even if we don't come back to the full board. Just my two
yeah.
cents.
Well,
So
and also, do we want to waste, I'm not sure if it's wasting the time, but take the time at the full board meeting to even bring this up as something for people to vote on as opposed to just, I'm not sure that we have voted on this in the past.
I
I
don't
never
think we
remember
have.
that. What's
But
the deadline? What's the timeline
We
we're
have to
talking
submit it by
about?
the end of the month.
the end of February, and we don't
my
get it
understanding
until,
was March 15. I'm sorry to jump in though.
oh, is it?
So
Okay.
February 17, we will get the preliminary budget. IBO issues their first report on the preliminary budget on March 1st, and March 15, the board is required to submit the statement on the preliminary budget.
And our March meeting would be on well, our land use is the 11th, and it would be on the 18th. Our
Correct.
full board
So
would be on the 18th.
that's right. So there's not another full board meeting.
But there is enough time, to Craig's point, to have another budget committee meeting and have the budget committee resolution go in representing the full board.
So I think that's an option. The question then is, will the full board, and this is the ultimate question is, we just need the full board to authorize the budget committee to sort of act on
So do it.
the board's behalf.
Coming
So
full
that's
circle to what you first proposed. So let's just do that. I so move.
Okay. And Craig, your hand's up. I assume you agree or?
Oh, I didn't mean, I meant to lower it, but I'll second the motion.
Okay. All right, since we're the four board members here, it is unanimous approval.
Okay.
Okay, is there any new business or old business that anyone wants to bring up? Okay, hearing none, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Have a great evening, everyone.
Good night.